More Like Home by Like to Laugh on AO3, Chapter 28. The exercise was simple. For the next few days, everyone would pretend not to know anything about anything. Not Danny and what he was. Not the cave under the manor. Not even about the nightlife in general. And Danny would have to pretend to deflect pointed questions and play it cool. Honestly, it was kind of fun. It would probably even keep his mind off his parents' trial, since he was supposed to be keeping himself available to have his defense picked over. Danny settled himself into the living room to play Halo. Within a few minutes, Duke sat on the other side of the couch and grabbed a controller, and they switched to Mario Bros. "So," Duke said after a few minutes, "easy and conventional. What is it like at Amity Park? The stories coming out of there are crazy, man." Danny straightened slightly, playing off his nerves with the ease of long practice. If he messed up, he'd remind himself. He'd just have to take the L and try again. "It was pretty crazy sometimes," he agreed, without looking at Duke. "And you can't throw any stones. You live in Gotham." "You got me there," Duke chuckled, with the warmth that all of the others seemed to regard Gotham with. Danny understood, honestly. "But I think you got us beat for pure weird. So is it true? Are there really, ghosts? Ghosts. Danny had to restrain a snort. "That's what they call themselves," he said, jumping Mario into a wheel and grunting in displeasure when he nearly tumbled into the void. "I didn't really see the point in arguing. Some of them looked like dead people, some of them didn't. Does it really matter?" "Yeah, it matters," Duke said with a startling earnestness. "Dude, you're around all those ghosts and you didn't even ask them if there was an afterlife?" "No." Danny didn't look away from the ceiling. "Busy staying away from them." "What a waste," Duke sighed with a disappointment that seemed sincere if you didn't know better. "Were they really that dangerous to be around?" "Oh, dude, you should have seen the property damage," Danny said. "Vlad was paying out of pocket just to keep up with them, because the guys in white were fighting every single claim, kept insisting the ghosts would pay for it." In research, a shiver ran down Danny's spine. Maybe he wouldn't include that part. "That sounds stupid." "It was so stupid," Danny sighed, trying to bounce over the wheel again. He succeeded this time, jumping on Luigi's head for effect. Duke squawked in indignation. "It was like they went out of their way to make everyone miserable, kept threatening to audit people's taxes and stuff." "Can they do that?" Duke asked, distracted. Danny shrugged. "Most people were too nervous to call their bluff," Danny said honestly. The whole thing had gotten them a lot further than he had thought it would at first. 15, and with only a few vague understandings of what taxes were. They didn't seem to care much about what was actually legal. Duke whistled. "And those were the good guys?" Danny's breath caught, the casual statement catching him off guard, and he froze. He understood the game, obviously, and that Duke knew better. Didn't he? They mostly talked about Danny's parents, and how insane it was that he put up with them. Had they talked about the GIW before? Danny couldn't remember. He watched a Koopa bump into Mario a few times, knocking him off the screen. Duke paused the game, turning to look at him with obvious concern. "You okay?" "I'm fine." Danny swallowed. I don't know what to say to that. The idea of GIW being remotely okay let alone good, was too foreign to him. He felt nauseous. Duke studied him for a moment, his forehead wrinkled. "You don't have to pretend like you like them," he said after a moment. "A lot of people in Amity don't, right?" Danny shook his head mutely. "So it's okay to correct people about it, especially given you know what your parents are being charged with. They're crimes against ghosts. Right. There were other people that agreed that, and he was a known ghost sympathizer, even in Amity Park." Danny closed his eyes, took a deep breath, shaky breath. "Good isn't the word I'd use," he said after a moment, as if Duke had only suggested it. "They're pretty liberal about shooting anyone they think might be a ghost in disguise. And they used to lock the school down whenever they wanted to search for ghosts. Drove the teachers insane because it riled up all the students. A lot of his classmates had gotten into arguments with agents over it. Once it was Mikey, when they hovered too long around Sydney's old locker." Pause. "You should tell B about that," Duke said a little quieter. "Because that's, really illegal." Danny nodded silently. After another beat, Duke fell back into character. "That's fucked up, dude. At least you're prepared to deal with Gotham's shitty police force." Danny managed to laugh, unpaused the game, and waited for his respawn bubble to float on screen. "Yeah, and I bet the police here don't leave holes in walls where they drove their cars in. That had only happened once, when their tracker caught him sleeping back inside. But it was memorable." "You'd be surprised," Duke said dryly, and then, forging bravely on with the exercise, "And they were always after Phantom, right? Which side is he on?" He popped Danny's bubble for him, releasing him back onto the course. This, at least, was familiar ground, something he practiced with Sam and Tucker before. "He's not on anyone's side. He just keeps people from getting hurt." "Does that make him a hero or an outlier?" Duke asked without missing a beat. "Does it matter?" Danny asked. Mario bumped into a mysterious block and grabbed a power-up shroom. "I trust him a lot more than I do the guys in white. Whatever definition of hero you're using, that's the important thing." Duke flashed a smile, then crossed the finish line. "Yeah, I guess you're right." A little after noon, Bruce came home early with Damien in tow. Danny was pretty sure it was like the third time in a month. Apparently, being raised by assassins didn't do much to prepare you for the American school system. "What was it this time?" Danny asked, because the fights Damien got into at school were usually interesting. Damien scowled. "My classmates were being obnoxious about Father's new ward," he huffed, dropping into one of the armchairs, as if it could be any of their business. "One of them couldn't hold his tongue long enough for me to hear the teacher speak. And so Damien grabbed him by the neck and threatened to throttle him." Bruce sighed. Damien crossed his arms. "I was extremely gentle. Unlike some people, I know how delicate the neck is. But its psychological effect is useful." Now, was that a jab at Danny or Vlad? Danny closed his computer, hiding the article on the day's trial proceedings. "Sorry you're dealing with that. I didn't mean to cause trouble for you." Of course people were pestering Damien. A new Wayne's ward was big news. Danny remembered Duke being adopted. He didn't even live in Gotham. And Vlad had spilled it everywhere when Bruce still couldn't legally talk about Danny. "You are not." Damien stiffened. "Unfortunately, my classmates are always this obnoxious. Them prying for one reason or another is nothing new. I'll have to get back to work," Bruce said, sounding for once like any other father. Danny felt an odd pang at the normalcy of the moment, like a taste of life he never had. Damien, you've been benched for a week, and I want you to read the nonviolent communications again. Damien huffed, obviously familiar with the punishment. Bruce just gave them both a nod and left. Damien scowled for a moment, then fixed a growler at Danny, who cocked his head. What makes you believe that you can handle living in Gotham? Damien demanded. The question was baffling, and it took Danny a moment to catch up and slip hastily into character. Nervous and shy, he ducked his head. I don't know. I'm already used to being attacked all the time. Amity Park is like that too. How different could it be? It's obvious that those ghosts are merely childish, not murderous. Have you ever been mugged? Oh, well, Danny squirmed. To be honest, he hadn't even come across a lot of muggings as Phantom. Only twice that he could remember, and both those times the offender had been completely dropped the idea once he showed up. One had apologized to both him and the victim. Not really, but I'm sure I can keep my head. Damien didn't seem impressed. Do you think you deserve to be adopted by Bruce Wayne? He demanded, raising to his feet to stalk closer and loom over Danny with menace. This was familiar. Damien didn't have Dash's bulk, but he was 3 times as intimidating. Danny shrank. What makes you so special? It's not really up to me, Danny said, soft and faltering. You'd kind of have to ask Bruce. There was a brief pause, and Damien huffed in annoyance, drawing back. Stop behaving submissively, he snapped. Danny glanced up in question, and Damien continued. You have decided to portray yourself as meek, but that is no reason to tolerate such blatant disrespect. Being soft-spoken shouldn't make you spineless. Avert your eyes if you must, but do not flinch. Do not flinch? Well, if there was one thing Danny was good at. Damien studied him for a moment, then nodded sharply. What makes you believe you can handle living in Gotham? Danny cut his gaze to the side, let his shoulders rise in discomfort, but didn't bend his head. I'm already used to being attacked, he said quietly, steady but soft. I figure this can't be much harder to get used to. You'll get killed in the street. Damien sneered at him. Danny shifted his gaze, one from Damien's shoulder to the other, rubbing his palm nervously. It was genuine. Even in a play scenario like this, it made him anxious to think of messing up. It's all the same skill, isn't it? He tried. You get to feel of when things are about to go bad, and you get away before they do? Damien grunted, which meant he was satisfied with that. Do you deserve to be adopted by Bruce Wayne? Danny shifted his gaze again, shoulder to shoulder, avoiding Damien's eyes. It made this easier. I don't think that has anything to do with it. I needed help, and the foster system is really hard on kids with complicated medical needs. He shifted his wrist, letting Damien see the medical bracelet Bruce had given him. I got lucky? He gotten really, really lucky. Damien nodded sharply. Are you planning to do anything of use with your life, or do you expect to be spoiled? Stop, Damien snapped. Danny halted in place, easily absorbing his own momentum after more than a month of practice, and Damien crossed his arms and frowned at him. While your strength is technically within human limits, it does not match your build. You are small and slight, and the strength of your blows is more suited to someone of father's build. Come. Danny winced and followed Damien over to one of the tables. Damien gestured for Danny to sit across from him, and Danny did. I guess if I'm supposed to be matching my build... Danny considered Damien, mentally comparing the younger boy to himself. They were about the same size. Although, something about Damien's shoulders told Danny he would grow up to match Bruce. I should try to match you, right? Damien nodded, setting his elbow on the table. Danny did the same, grasping Damien's hand, and Damien pushed against it. Yes, this is how John and Con measure the strength of their allies. It's a skill you should develop as well. Danny concentrated, letting their hands move back and forth across the table till they met in the middle. Danny pushing against Damien's hand with the precise strength of the other while using it to push his. It was hard to get exactly right. Danny had no idea how Con managed it so quickly, having matched Danny's in a minute flat, and then he held it there while Danny practiced his telekinesis. Eventually, though, Danny got it and tried to memorize the amount of pressure he was putting into it. Damien let go with a nod. Remember that, he said, rising to his feet. We will continue. Danny hopped up and placed himself back in the ring, turning to Damien to focus. Their practice was different than usual today. While Danny had made leaps and bounds in his actual practice of hand-to-hand, this time they were more focused on keeping himself within human limits, something that would be important if he was ever forced to fight in his human form in front of witnesses. It had happened before, but luckily none of his classmates at Castor High were likely to notice if he moved faster than a human could. Damien attacked first, and Danny tried to move with the blow, intentionally recoiling as Damien struck his shoulder hard, then his knee. He retaliated quickly, and this time, when his hands hit Damien's block, Damien gave him a sharp nod. He used about the right strength. They kept going. How far can a human fall without injury? Damien demanded. 12 feet, Danny said. He couldn't duck Damien's kick fast enough, but Damien didn't object to the cartwheel he did to absorb the blow. How high can an average human jump? Damien struck out with his fist, and Danny twisted around it. 2 feet. Danny yelped when Damien grabbed his kicking foot and yanked, caught him on Damien's shoulder, and pushed him away. Damien grunted in displeasure but didn't pause, and Danny turned to face him, time to block another strike. How long does a broken bone take to heal? Damien tripped Danny up, and this time Danny hit the ground, blocked Damien's kick with one arm, and rolled back to his feet with a bounce. Recoveries were something he'd gotten particularly good at. Damien was a brilliant fighter. 6 to 8 weeks. Danny tried to grab Damien in a hold, but without his superhuman speed, he had no chance of catching him. Damien twisted away and elbowed him in the ribs for his trouble, and Danny grunted and hopped back a step. They were at it for another half an hour, and as usual, by the end of it, Danny was glad for the break. They sat off to the side and drank some water, content with the progress Danny had made. I didn't realize I've gotten so out of touch with human limits, Danny admitted, a little unsettled. Matching Damien's strength, speed, and ambient durability was difficult, and Damien was on the high end of human limits. say nothing of Danny's first guess on how high a human could jump or how long it took for a broken bone to heal. Damien grunted dismissively. Most civilians do not know human limits with anywhere near this precision, he said, setting his water bottle aside. He didn't seem tired, but the sweat beaded on his forehead and trickled through his hair. The vast majority would most likely not notice if you go slightly outside of them, but some would, and anyone will notice an egregious violation. Danny hummed, taking another deep drink of water. After 2 months, he got a pretty good feel for Damien. He reminded Danny of Valerie when she was still in costume. Mission-focused with an effective kind of brutality. Although, unlike Valerie, Damien was like that all the time. Still, Danny liked him, even if he wasn't sure what Damien thought of him. Have you ever thought about what you're going to do after high school? Danny asked on impulse. It seemed to be vary between teen superheroes. Tim had his CEO work. McCon was still reluctant to commit to anything. Dick was a cop, a job he hated but was too stubborn to quit. And Jason was a crime lord. It's just, I haven't heard you talk about it. Damien cast him a suspicious look, but didn't object to his prying. I'm still considering, he said after a moment. It's likely that I will choose either to be a veterinarian or a doctor. Being a veterinarian would give me some space for vigilantism, while Father would approve of, but becoming a doctor might be more meaningful to me. Why do you ask? Danny smiled sheepishly. I was just wondering, he admitted. Bruce mentioned that some team heroes struggle to make the transition to adulthood because so much of their lives revolve around hero work instead of civilian stuff. I don't know how I'm going to handle it. Damien grunted. You'll handle it fine, he said dismissively. You've already have a job in mind that you're passionate about. Khan has no interest outside of the hero community and has no skills which transfer particularly well into a career that interests him. And Raven is disinterested in even attempting to maintain a civilian life. The same could be said for both Wonder Girls, Miss Martian, and Arrowette. It is a problem primarily faced by those not raised in a civilian environment. Even Starfire took time to adjust. Oh, that made sense. Danny flashed Damien a grateful smile. You and Cass seem to be doing fine. Father is very interested about us developing interest outside of vigilantism. Damien deadpanned, and Danny laughed. Yeah, that made sense too. I'd briefly considered working in the animal shelters, but a medical career would be most stimulating and have more applications outside of work. I would volunteer instead. Danny nodded thoughtfully. Do you know what specialty you would go into? General surgery, Damien answered, though that is more if it's potential for emergency applications rather than actual interest in the practice. He studied Danny for a moment. Are you concerned about your career prospects? A little, Danny confessed, shifting to face Damien better. I don't think it'll be a problem if I manage to land a job where I can focus on space, but anything else, I don't know if I'll be able to concentrate. I can get away with that at school, but with a job, he trailed off. School is atrociously boring, Damien dismissed. I wouldn't concern yourself with it. If you put half as much work into your career as you have in school this term, you shouldn't have any trouble reaching your own current goals. Damien was a lot nicer than anyone gave him credit for. Danny smiled at him. Thanks. Dinner was spent fielding questions as everyone did their best to trip Danny up. Alfred only barely tolerated it. He had a strict policy against letting them talk about business during dinner, but seemed to give in because everyone was at least a little bit amused, even Danny. It probably helped that everyone was here, all the way down to Dick and Jason, who had come to participate in Danny's torment. "So, what's the device you made for the contest, anyway?" Tim asked casually, cutting his fish with a fork. "Shock absorber," Danny said promptly, glancing up from his food. "It's supposed to nullify moderate electric shocks and dampen severe ones. Ectoplasm is really good at absorbing strong energy. That's why I used it." "What's wrong with rubber gloves?" Tim asked, knowing perfectly well what rubber gloves did and didn't do. "Extremely high voltages can cut right through rubber," Danny explained anyway. "Most rubber gloves can only handle about 750 volts at most, but you can get ones that can handle up to 50,000 if you're willing to shell out about $500. Tim hummed in interest. "I'm trying to make something that you could buy for about 100 that could protect, like, city maintenance workers. It's not there yet, but it does work." Most of that was even true. Danny was working on that, and even had talked about the idea with Tucker, which was where the price points came from. He hadn't made nearly as much progress on it as he was implying, though. Maybe he could, once he had free access to ectoplasm again. "What do you think of metas?" Duke asked, a little while later. Danny chewed on his bread and thought carefully. He was still debating on whether or not he wanted to be out as a meta. Meta-biology still wasn't well understood, so ice powers could explain away most of his medical differences without too much scrutiny, and he'd have a freer access to his ice powers, which was useful for all kinds of reasons. On the other hand, it would give him a solid connection to Phantom, and it would draw scrutiny. Bruce definitely had an opinion. Danny could tell, but he wasn't sharing it. "I think it must be terrifying," Danny said at last, without looking directly at Duke. "To suddenly manifest powers you didn't ask for and don't understand. Getting used to them would have to be a lot of work. They need all the help they can get." He glanced up again. Duke was smiling, faint and fond, and when their eyes met, he gave Danny a nod before digging into his food again. Towards the end of dinner, Jason spoke up. "What do you think it feels like to die?" he asked. No one at the table flinched at the question, all of them too deep their character for that. But in the air the room thickened anyway. Danny had to shove down a flash of panic. But one look at Jason's eyes told him that Jason knew exactly what he was doing. And, well, of course he did. He was probably the only one there who was comfortable with pressing Danny on this point. Most of the people here had died before. Dick had told Danny at some point, trying to make him feel more at ease. But Jason took it the hardest, like being strangled to sleep. "I've never thought about it," Danny lied, meeting Jason's expectant eyes. "Your brain just turns off, right? It probably doesn't feel like anything." Bruce and Damien both averted their gaze, stiff with tension. Dick played with his fork, lips pressed together. Steph huffed quickly. Kaz lowered her head. There was a touch of dark humor in Jason's eyes that no one called him out on. "You never thought about it? Even with all the ghosts around where you were from?" It was hard not to react, and Danny probably held himself a little too still in doing so. His eyes locked onto Jason's. "It's not like any of them look like dead people. Half of them barely even look human." His stomach flipped, but he didn't flinch, and he chose to consider that a victory. Fenton doesn't know any ghosts. Fenton doesn't talk to ghosts. Fenton doesn't support his parents' view on ghosts, but he still avoids them for safety's sake. The amusement vanished from Jason's eyes, which gave Danny a moment to brace himself before the next question. What about Phantom? He was definitely human. How do you think he died? The tension in the room ratcheted up a few notches, but no one interrupted. All of them knew, just as Danny and Jason both did, that this was a question Danny needed to be able to fend. Danny swallowed his first couple of responses. It's rude to speculate, and he doesn't like to talk about it, and everyone knows he died in a lab accident. It was true, though. His hazmat suit was very recognizable in Amity Park, thanks to his parents, so lab accident was the most common guess so far. I don't know. Gun violence, maybe? It would make sense with the protector thing. Bruce cleared his throat with some relief. Danny let his attention snap to him instead. You've already decided to make your lab accident public knowledge, he reminded Danny eventually. But you held your composure well. Danny swallowed, nodded tightly, and busied himself with his food, trying to buy himself a few minutes to recover. They let him have it, the air around the room loosening again. Jason reached over to ruffle his hair, both an apology and silent reassurance. And Cass slipped an extra roll onto his plate, nudging their feet together to catch his attention so she could smile at him. Danny smiled back and tried to relax. How do you think Phantom died? Lab accident, right? He mentioned it before. Better. He tried to commit the answer to memory. All in all, still a lot less stressful than listening to his parents plan his dissection. After dinner was more fun, but possibly even harder. With great glee, Stephanie kidnapped him from the table and dragged him into the living room, where it was clear that they had set up a game night, taking advantage once again of everyone being there. So, Danny, Stephanie said, popping down with a shit-eating grin. Kiss, marry, kill. Nightwing, Signal, and Red Hood. Danny managed to keep himself from verbally reacting, but he couldn't help the way his face blazoned red, instantly mortified by the question. Oh my God. Dick stifled a snicker and patted his back in false sympathy. Tim tried valiantly not to smile, and Damien rolled his eyes, already looking fed up with this phase of the exercise. Unfortunately, Danny was pretty sure that didn't mean Damien was going to save him. Answer the question, Jason called out, eyes glittering with amusement. I don't want to die, Danny decided, burying his face in his hands as he tried not to look at any of the three people in question. Cass joined Dick in patting his back, but he could hear her giggling too. You're in high school, Danny, Dick reminded him, like he could forget it. People playing that game all the time. You're going to get pulled into a game of Fuck, Marry, Kill Gotham Vigilante Edition at some point. Probably multiple times. And then I will melt into the floor, thereby saving myself from answering, Danny grumbled, making most of the others snort. He tried to shake off the embarrassment, forcing himself to settle down. Kiss Nightwing, marry Signal, and kill Red Hood. Because? Steph prompted, obviously enjoying Danny's pain. Heat spread across Danny's cheeks, but he managed to answer anyway, pulling from past sleepovers with his friends. He played, but only ever with Sam and Tucker. Nightwing seems like he'd be up to it. I feel like Signal would be a reasonable partner, Red Hood wouldn't take it personally. For the sake of the exercise, Jason visibly bit down a retort, but the amusement in his eyes didn't fade. Stephanie nodded seriously, then prompted, Batman? Black Bat? Red Robin? No mercy. These people had no mercy.